If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
Hello and welcome to Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where our criminals cut checks instead of necks. I'm Greg Kite.
And I'm Caleb Newquist. Greg, I am excited for this episode today. You know why?
Why is that, Caleb Newquist?
Well, for starters, we are doing a follow-up episode from an earlier episode, episode 4, which is entitled With Great Check Writing Power Comes Great Responsibility.
Yep.
And it is worth our episode is an interview of the perpetrator of that fraud. That's why I'm excited. Are you excited?
Yes, we interviewed Nathan Mueller. The dude stole over $8 million from insurance giant ING in the early 2000s, which is one of my favorite fraud cases ever. And I've done tons of webinars and live CPE events where I've referenced this fraud. So I kept thinking that I was like, am I Nathan Mueller's biggest fan? But it's weird to be a fan of a guy who committed a crime. But I know a lot more about Nathan Mueller than I do about like Adele or Tom Segura, and I am fans of them. So it's a weird place to be.
So let me ask you, what is it about this fraud that makes it one of your favorites?
Honestly, I think one of the big things that makes it one of my favorites is that the first account that I ever read of this fraud was Nathan Mueller's own account of it. So the fact that we got some inside baseball on it, but then it's also just fun, as we'll see with the interview, we get into it. There's some weird turns and twists that happen as this fraud continues. Some close calls that he had that were just delightful for those of us who weren't committing the fraud, but probably the exact opposite for Nathan while he was in the thick of it.
Yeah. I mean, I had this ended up being a great conversation. I didn't know what to expect. I am not a fanboy on the level that you are. I'm not even a fanboy. I'm a fan of this case. I like this. I thought it was a good story, but then to able to like get the guy and sit him down and just hear him out was thoroughly enjoyable, and I learned a lot. And of course, we'll talk about all that stuff at the end. But I feel like you've got your fanboy energy. It's the right level of fanboy energy. That's what I'm saying to you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I wasn't encouraging him to do more fraud. When's your next
like,
album drop, Nathan?
Yeah. It's like, is it time for a comeback? Is that what?
Right.
You wouldn't want him to leave with feeling that. He's like, oh, maybe this guy.
I think you got it in it. I think you got it in you, Nathan. Yeah.
Anyway, well, having said all that, let's get into our conversation with Nathan Mueller.
Nathan, again, so glad to have you on the podcast. Just to give you a little more context than the emails that we sent back and forth. I don't know if it's right to say this, but I'm kind of like a super fan of yours because way back in 2014, there was an article in the Journal of Accountancy where the majority of the article was first person. Like you wrote, I assume you wrote that and you submitted it, and then they put kind of some commentary around that. Is that right?
Yeah. So I wrote that from prison.
Oh.
And so that was me and Mark DeGreeny going back and forth via our email system at the time and through the mail, writing, editing, getting feedback from the Journal of Accountancy on how to do that. So yeah, it was an interesting endeavor to do. Prison email is like the email we had in like the 90s where just a straight text, I had 15 minutes at a time to be on. Each minute on email cost me 15 cents.
Jeez.
So it was write down my notes and blast through it on email and get it back to him and get it submitted. So it was a probably not your standard article writing procedure.
Yeah. I mean, that's maybe a little easier than like using your one phone call to just call into and say, transcribe this real quick. Well, we got one shot.
Right.
Let's go, AICPA.
Right.
Well, getting up to, I mean, and if I guess just to give the listeners a little bit of context as well. So you were convicted of a fraud. You stole a little bit over $8 million from the insurance company AIG. So far, so good.
ING, Greg.
ING.
ING. What did I say? Is it AIG? Was it?
Yeah.
I screw everything up all the time.
So Nathan, just to prepare you, Nathan, a little bit. A regular theme of this podcast is Greg saying things and me correcting him. So look forward to that. Throughout this conversation.
Yeah, I'll read numbers and even though they're correct in my notes, I'll say them wrong. That's the sort of brain damage. I'm going to blame it on COVID. But let's lead, and that happened between, if I remember right, like 2004 and 2007 is when the fraud was happening, right?
Yeah. So there's basically like the phase one, which I call it, which was $83,000. I stole over the summer of 2003. I stopped for about 6 months, went back in March of 2004 for phase two, and that went on from April of 2004 until September of 2007.
Okay, gotcha. Now, just again, I mean, part of the story that I don't know, tell us kind of your life journey. How old were you when all that was going down, approximately?
I started the fraud when I was 29.
Okay.
So I had been in that position, or in that, not position, but in that company for 6 years at that point. So it wasn't a brand new situation. It was years of growth within a small department, within a big company, with a lot of knowledge and experience across the board, how things worked, how our audits worked, how my bosses checked my work. I had a good understanding of how things worked there when I decided to go down that path.
Right. Gotcha. Well, tell me kind of growing up, like where did you grow up in Minnesota? What was growing up like? What was your family situation like? What did you study in college? Stuff like that. Kind of give us the pre-fraud resume for Nathan Mueller.
So I grew up in a small town, like 3,000 people, South Central Minnesota. I look back at my childhood and think, okay, I had a loving, supportive family in that small town, star athlete. I got good grades. I was popular. I had all this positivity in my life, but I wasn't happy. Even as a teenager, I was not happy. And so I think what I thought at the time was, well, I have a great family. I do well in school. I'm popular. I do well in sports. I have all this positivity. What don't I have? And it was money. Our family didn't have a lot of money. And so I somehow placed a lot of importance on, is money the thing that's going to make me happy? Is it going to be the thing that makes, it makes my life fulfilling? Is it going to be the thing that makes people view me as successful? And I think that's kind of the road I took. So when I looked at college, I went into accounting because in my small town, there was 2 CPAs. They drove nice cars. They had nice homes. They had this financial success, respect within the community, and stability that I wanted, and so I took an accounting class in high school. I decided I'm going to be an accountant. So I majored in accounting. I went to college, just right down the road from my hometown, 10 miles away. Good school, they wanted me to play football there. They had a good accounting program. But for me, college was like it was a shortcut. My goal was get a degree and get a job because I need to start making money. That was always my goal, was the money. And so I didn't go to college and experience college. I didn't go to college and, make a ton of friends. I didn't go to college to even get an education. I went there to get a degree, to get a job. And that's what I did. And so what college ended up being for me was, I didn't focus on the right things. I focused on getting through as quickly as possible. So I finished in 3.5 years, but I had an average GPA. And in the accounting world, as you guys probably know, when you finish, you want to get a job with one of those big firms. When you come to campus to interview, they're not talking to people with a 2.7 GPA. They're talking to people with a 3.5 and higher. So I'd limited myself from those jobs from the start. And so, my career started with a lower level internship at I literally worked for a CPA, his wife and his daughter, in a small, firm. And it was, part of it was just my eagerness to get through school and not really care about how it did. The other thing was I just didn't know, I was very naive to the accounting world in every way, which included hiring and how to get a job at the places you actually want to work. So,
yeah.
I have to say, if I may, a lot of what you describe, I personally can resonate. It personally resonates with me because I also grew up in a very small town in flyover country, and my family did not have a lot of money, but I had a friend whose dad was a CPA, and like they had a great house and like all the things you described. They had a great boat, like all this stuff. And I also was kind of like, again, loving family, a lot of support. I was not popular. I was not good at sports. So
that's what I was going to say. The sports part could not have resonated with you. You got no upper body strength. So that's
it's not a perfect image, Greg. It's not a perfect mirror image, but it's close.
But there's
all I'm saying is a lot of what you say, Nathan, I can personally relate to, because accounting what I understood was that the kind of the economic mobility that accounting could provide to me, that part was like clear to me. And I got to take accounting classes in high school. I took my first classes in high school. And so my mind was made up that that's what I was going to pursue. Again, college, I actually, I did have a college experience. I drank my face off. So like it got a little out of hand, but, so it doesn't quite track your college experience, but like in terms of like upbringing and deciding on accounting, that all of that rings very true and very close to my own experience.
So moving forward to kind of get some of the more meatier stuff of this, just let me see if I can explain my understanding of how you were able to perpetrate the fraud. Just in a nutshell, you worked in a small department. And first off, you worked at a company that got acquired by ING, and when that happened, all of a sudden you just get granted the authority to approve checks up to $250,000, right? That like just sort of like, this is weird, but okay, whatever, $250,000,
right?
Okay, and then since it was a small department, if you guys wanted to get stuff done when somebody was sick or on vacation or something like that, if you were to use normal internal controls, everything would just kind of shut down. So you shared passwords and logins so that if somebody happened to be gone or sick or on vacation, that you could still do your job. And then all of a sudden one day you had kind of this light bulb moment where you go, oh, wait a second, I could go in and I could request a check as me, and I could go into somebody else and approve that check through them, and then I could pick up the check, and then that's my check. And that's sort of how that's the idea that formed, and that was more or less how you committed the fraud. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, you make it sound so easy. Yeah. It really wasn't that easy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what was it? Tell me a little bit more about the deal, because oh, sorry.
Did you mention the foreign currency bit, like where the stuff got buried, or did you mention that?
I would look at that later in the story a little bit.
Okay, got it. Okay, sorry, not jumping ahead. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, he doesn't know you as well as I do, Nathan. Let me.
I'll just. The listeners can't see it, but I'm fading into the hedge like Homer Simpson.
Like Homer Simpson into the bushes. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So tell me a little bit about, because you touched on it in the article where you had there was something about like picking up the checks too, because usually the separation of duties is you have one person who has physical assets physical control of the asset. You have someone else who does the bookkeeping and someone else who does the reconciliation. Wasn't there some part of the story where you also had to have an excuse to go and pick up the checks that were getting processed through your fraudulent system?
Correct. Yeah. So as far as the check pickup went, on a normal daily basis, one of our lower level employees, she would grab the check register. So our admin system that sent the check run over every night to PeopleSoft automatically printed out some reports. And as part of that, there was a check register. So here's the checks that were sent over to PeopleSoft to be printed. She would grab that report, walk across the street to the division, because the same person printed the checks for all 7 divisions around in the Minneapolis campus. And they would print the checks, paperclip them, put a Post-it note on, reinsurance, REB, all the things, put them in a 3-ring binder with a log, and that sat in an empty cubicle. So every morning this girl would grab the check register, walk across the street, grab reinsurance checks, initial that she took the checks. She would bring them back to our boss, the controller. He would verify that the checks that printed matched the check register. That's the checks we're expecting, and from there they were sent out. So I was the backup for both of those people in that thing. So if that girl was not there that day, I was the one to pick up the check register, go across the street, pick up the checks, bring them to my boss. So when I was going to steal money, she had to be gone so I could be the one to pick up the checks. Or when my boss was gone, she would go pick up the checks, bring that back to me, and I would verify that the checks matched the register. So either he needed to be gone or she needed to be gone. And so, early on in my fraud, I would only do it days that I knew that one of those two was going to be gone the next day. But then later that girl actually reported to me. So I would, I need money this week. So I would go through the process, request a check, approve it as somebody else. Then I would go to her and give her the day off the next day. You've been doing a great job. Why don't you take tomorrow off? And she thought I was just this amazing manager, and it was
Right.
just
Best
one more
boss ever.
Best boss
Right.
ever.
just so I could keep my eyes on the checks.
Yeah. Did she give you a world's greatest boss mug at any point?
She just verbally,
Just verbally.
just verbally gave me the "you're such a great boss." So.
Yeah. Got it. Well, and that's not uncommon. At my work, the guy who hired me, I ended up he had perpetrated a fraud over a number of years before I even got there, and it was a weird thing. Not to get into that too much, but one of the I loved him as a bot. He was a great guy to work for. He was just a nice guy. I considered him a close friend. How were your people skills? Obviously you're this person who worked for you. Were you kind of a star? Was everybody enamored with you in your department at ING?
Early on in my career there, I worked my butt off, which allowed me to be promoted, allowed me to, keep taking on more responsibility. My reviews on an annual basis were top notch. And then, so when I started committing the fraud, I was on some level high producing employee there. I think people liked me, even though I don't know. I've always been kind of like, like brooding, negative. I guess I can. I guess
Also tracks. Also tracks.
I would say that historically, if you came to my office to talk to me about something, it was serious because I tried to set an atmosphere where people didn't bother me. But no, I think I could be nice. I could be engaging. I could be, all of those things if I needed to.
But it sounds like you created career capital for yourself just by working your butt off, because it sounds like you were very motivated and very focused on you wanted to make money. And so that's because of that. And employers like that. If you're motivated to make money, and you're willing to do whatever they tell you to do to make it, you're going to be a star. So is that more or less correct?
I think that's a big part of it, which is why I think, especially from my boss, I had a lot of trust. I think I had way too much trust in what I was able to do. And, again, it was like all these things kind of fell together to make all of this possible. But I do think that my work ethic, my, results, how I did things, that's why I continued to get more responsibility and get more trust within the department, which really helped, in the stealing the money and covering it up. So.
Gotcha. So, you like you alluded to before, there was kind of a phase 1 and a phase 2 to your fraud. there were some interesting things about phase one. So you stole less than $100,000 in phase one, and basically you were thinking, I want to get out of debt. And so you had listened to a lot of Dave Ramsey, and you're like, Dave Ramsey, you are a man of the Lord, and you've inspired me to steal from my company to get out of debt, because that's what God really wants. But that was the motivation, right?
Correct. So we were, my now ex-wife, we were having a baby. And every part of like my story was a lie or a fraud. Like, we were going to have a baby. I thought that, the best thing for our daughter is for, us mom to stay home, quit her amazing career. My ex-wife she had a great job, super smart, amazing person. I basically convinced her that she should quit her job and be a stay-at-home mom. At that point, I was like, well, okay, I worked two jobs. I was working at Star and then ING, but I was still working at that CPA firm. So I was working basically two full-time jobs. Yeah. I made good money at the time. Could I support the family on one income or my two incomes? Yeah. But then, the next part of the lie is I had a bunch of debt my wife didn't know about. And so at that point, I'm like, what do I do? Do I come clean to her and be like, hey, I have this debt you didn't know about? Which obviously being honest was not my thing back then. So I wasn't about to admit that to her. Now, I can't really make more money. I'm already working two jobs. So how do I come up with additional money to keep paying off this debt? So that's when the thought of the fraud popped into my head. Like, that's when I started justifying, not that it was okay or, like not wrong, just justifying it from the standpoint that, could I do this? Could I steal money? And what's it for? And I convinced myself, number one, it was my only option, and which was a lie, because my whole life was about appearances. And so I wasn't willing to like live on a budget. I was all about appearances, keeping up with the Joneses. And like, so I convinced myself, well, I don't have any other option but to steal, And so that was a lie. And the other thing I convinced myself was I was doing it for my family, which I wasn't. I was doing it to keep up appearances. Yes, I was going to use the money to pay off debt and, have my wife stay home with my child, but it wasn't about that. It was about the, I can support my family. My wife can quit her job and stay home. So how does that makes me look successful, in my skewed view of success back then. And so it was all for the wrong reason, and it was all lying to myself about it. But that was the decision I made.
Can I just clarify one thing? Did you come to the relationship with your wife? Did you come to the marriage with the debt? Was that something that you came with, or did that happen after y'all had been married?
Yeah, so like going through school, she was a year younger than me. Her family was wealthy, but she didn't have, when I graduated college, I had credit card debt. I had a lot more school loans than she had. And from my childhood, even though it doesn't make sense looking back, I carried shame with my financial situation. And so when I finished school and I had all this debt and she finished school and she didn't, I just felt like, well, I don't think she would be with a guy like me who has all this debt. Like, I'm just not going to tell her about it and stuff. And so with our finances, since I kind of ran everything, we somewhat kept separate finances in that, her dad was a bank president. She already had her bank account. She already had her credit. She already had that stuff. I had mine. So we had one joint account, but I paid our bills. I did our taxes. I handled our finances. And so, and she just didn't care, and so she really was kind of a perfect victim for me, because she trusted me and she didn't care about money or material stuff at all. So, but yeah, that was stuff I brought to the relationship.
Got it.
Yeah. And so the next beat in the story is probably my favorite part, because if, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like the last check, because you kept transferring balances to your credit card and you would send checks into your credit card. And it was like the last check so that you would be, so all this debt that you brought with you is completely out the door. And then at that moment, you had a crazy scare. Tell us that part of the story if you would.
Right. So I was cutting the checks from ING's account to my credit card company, because I thought that started because obviously I couldn't write a check to myself. I needed to send it to somebody where the payee would look normal in the system. And so I had a credit card with a financial institution that, we had an insurance company that we did business with. And I thought, okay, it's just going to look like a little commission check. And so I had set that up. I called the credit card company. I was like, is it okay if my employer reimburses my travel expenses by cutting checks to you directly? And they're like, we don't care who pays us as long as somebody pays us. And so for me, it was like, perfect. I'm going to cut checks, send them, pay that off. So like you said, over that summer, I paid off that credit card. I transferred balances from other credit cards. I paid those off. Remember the old convenience checks you got in your statement every month? I used that to pay off my school loans. I paid off my car. I paid off all this debt that my wife didn't know about, And so I get towards the end of the summer, and I have spreadsheets of my entire fraud. So I have all this stuff. So I can
a true accountant,
right? I love my spreadsheets.
You're calculating your utilization rate for your fraud.
I love my spreadsheets, but not as much as the FBI.
Right.
So I get to the end of the summer. I'd cut a check for $5,500. My first check was $1,100. Over the summer, it grew, $1,500, $1,800, $2,000, up to $5,500. I mailed the check off, and by this time I'm extremely paranoid. I didn't think it was going to work from the start, and every time I did it, I was more convinced I was going to get caught. And even though it wasn't huge amounts, I still was like freaking out. So every time I'd done it, the process was the same, the timing was the same. Log into PeopleSoft, request a check as myself, log out, log right back in as my coworker, approve the check, pick it up the next day, mail it to my credit card company. 2 days later, it hits my credit card. The day after that, it clears the bank. I can see the process through PeopleSoft, through my credit card online. So
you had it down cold. Sounds like you had it down cold.
It worked the same every single time.
Yeah.
So this last check, I mail off. Day 2, it doesn't show up on my credit card statement. Day 3, it doesn't clear the bank. A week goes by, so now I'm convinced they caught it. They know, literally
right.
I was waiting for the, FBI to jump off from under my desk when I got to work every day. And so 2 weeks go by, nothing. And so I'm just like, my daughter's due in a couple of weeks. Like I'm freaking.
Oh, man.
And so,
jeez.
I walk in one day and I laughed about this with somebody the other day. Like, do people still get those inner office mail envelopes, where you'd get stuff from the different departments around the country? And so I get an envelope, I open it up, there's the check. And so it turned out that I had forgot to put my account information on the check when I mailed it off. Credit card company gets the check, doesn't know what to do with it. They mail it back to the address on the check, which is accounts payable in Atlanta. Person in accounts payable gets the check, looks it up, sees that I'm the requester. Because she knows me, she just sends me the check back. And so
kind of like this guy will know what, I don't know what to do with it. This guy will know what to do with it.
Yeah. This was somebody I talked to every single day. So when she looked at the thing, it was my check. She's just like, oh, it's Nathan's, sent it back to me. And so at that point, I'm like, that was my one-off. That was my reminder from God or something. It's time to stop this. You got away with one there. And so
it was your reminder from Dave Ramsey. He was like, okay, you paid off your debt. Now let's wrap this up because you're done. Right.
So there was that scare, and there was the objective. I had done what I set out to do. I had paid off my credit cards. I paid off my car. I paid out $83,000 in debt. Never bought one thing. I didn't spend the money on anything. I just paid out debt. That was done. Stop stealing. Move on. So.
Yeah. So you were the world's most responsible fraudster ever.
Right. For 6 months.
For 6 months. Okay. So, and an interesting thing, because this just came to mind while you were talking. If you had flipped that around, and if you had logged in as a coworker to request the check, and you had been the person approving the check, it would have blown up right there, because the check would have got sent back to somebody else, not you, and they would have been like, "This is not an okay check," and you would have been caught that way too, right?
Yeah, that's actually, I've never thought of that, but yeah, 100%.
Because I think when I've thought about this fraud in the past, I go, it's probably kind of arbitrary, and maybe sometimes Nathan logged in and requested it, sometimes maybe logged in to approved as yourself rather than as somebody else. Right. But it sounds like you had a system where you were always the requester, and you always logged in as somebody else as the approver.
I would guess out of the 99 times I did it, there were times that I didn't do it exactly like that. I know, so here's the thing, we had a team of 6 people. I know there was people that had their passwords on a Post-it note on their monitor. And so
Of course.
I know at least one time my coworker that I usually use her password, it didn't work. And so instead of like locking up her thing, because I had tried twice, I just grabbed this other girl's and requested it as her and approved it as me. So I know that I did, I'm sure a few times flip it around and request it as somebody else and approve it as myself. But yeah, on that case, that's a great point that I never thought of, that could have stopped it all right there.
And it's funny because we all laugh about people having just their passwords on a Post-it note on their computer, but like I scorned your coworker, and then immediately I was like, oh, I absolutely have some passwords on Post-it notes on my computer too. So it's not like too far fetched. So here's the part. So part B of your fraud,
Phase two.
Because clearly your motivation was, I want to get out of debt, and then like, what was your motivation for phase two? Was it just like what you're talking about in terms of growing up and just like because you were comfortable yourself? I mean, I'd think if all of my commercial debt was paid off, I've got my mortgage, but I've got a decent job, I'm making some okay money, then I'm okay. And yeah, so what? Especially thinking you probably could have just shut it down and gotten off scot-free. But you decided to go back in hard for phase two. What was that motivation?
So, and here's the thing I get from other people, like, we were with you on the first part, but when we went phase two, that's when you lost us, because some people could understand, hey, I'm trying to get out of debt, take care of the family, but phase two...
It seems noble. That stuff all seems kind of noble.
So with phase two, and I remember this, and again, I have the business set up for the business that I set up, so I know the dates of all this stuff. So in March of 2004, it's been 6 months since what I call the scare. So the scare is wearing off. The miserable life I was living over that 83 grand 6 months prior, I kind of forgot about it. Things were good now. My little girl's 6 months old. Work's going well. Financially, I'm in a good place. So I'm sitting at my desk and I was thinking, I did all that work to steal that money and I didn't even do anything fun with it. And so like literally that was my thought, like just off the rails, insane, self-thought. So at that point I was like, man, how could I do this and really have some fun with it? Like, really ramp this up and start buying some stuff. And it wasn't from the standpoint like, okay, I want a new car, I want a watch, I want this. I had nothing in my mind about what I would buy if I had this money. I just thought, basically let's go. And so I committed to it. Just like the first time, once I had committed to it in my mind, I was going to do it, even though I could sit there all day long and think, this is a horrible idea. Like, this is not a good idea. This is not going to work. You're going to get caught, all these negative things. Once I committed, I was like, I'm in. And so the only thing up in the air right now is how am I going to do it, And so at that point I was like, with the credit card thing, what I did like about it was mailing those checks off. I'd lost control over the process. And so I wanted to commit my fraud in a way that I had total control of the process. So I need to be able to get those checks and put them in a bank account and have full access to everything. And so that's when I thought, and to me, it's so basic. This is like embezzlement 101. Well, I'm going to set up a company with the same name as one of our brokers, and I'm going to cut checks, and it looks like it's to a broker, but it's right into my account. So I went through that process of, I got a federal ID number. I filed a name with the Secretary of State. I had a P.O. box. I had a business bank account at Wells Fargo. I had a business on paper solely to commit fraud, which again, the biggest thing that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney couldn't believe is that I filed a legit tax return on that business and reported all my stolen money. So the joke there is I didn't want to lose my license over this. So,
well, but also, that's someone who's financially savvy, who's a professional, in accounting, that you're going to go, if I've got a business, I want everything to look legit. And part of getting caught's going to be, we've all watched Untouchables, so we all know that the IRS is how bad guys go to jail.
Right. Yeah, if they don't get here, they're here.
Yeah. So that all makes sense to me. What were some of the Well, I guess, yeah, you must have been spending money just hand over fist then once it started hitting your account.
Yeah, so it started small and unnoticeable, and I recognized I had rules early on that I just stopped following, but like when I first started stealing money, the first big check I took there was $27,000. I wasn't trying to, raise a bunch of suspicion. $27,000 is a ton of money to me at that point.
Right.
But I started like at that time, I'd go to Best Buy every week, buy new release CDs, DVDs. I bought a TV. Okay. Those are like things that people would be, oh, you must be stealing. You bought 4 DVDs this week. I started. I got into watches, and so I bought my first like $800 watch. And like as stuff evolved, I spent more money and stuff. Like I just would go to the grocery store and not worry about what I spent that week, or I might go buy a couple new shirts, and it was all small stuff that wasn't noticeable. The first vehicle that I wrote a check for, I had the same vehicle. My lease ran out, so I got the same vehicle again. I just wrote a check for it. So I'm driving the same vehicle. That doesn't raise any suspicion,
Right.
And it got to the point where I was like, I had some lies in there. As I was starting to spend a little more money, noticeable money, but not like, well, that's crazy. One of the things people knew, everybody knew I worked 2 jobs. Nobody knew how much money I made. My wife didn't even know how much money I made. She didn't care, But everybody knew that the CPA that I worked for, nights and weekends, they knew that he wanted me to come back full time and buy him out in retirement. They knew, everybody knew that he wanted me back. And so I was like, yeah, he's trying to entice me back. So he's giving me more work, more clients, more money. And so, I'm making, $2-3 more a month than I was. And that explained some of that spending. And then it got to the point,
But that wasn't really happening. You were just, that was your lie to cover up your spending, or was he really doing that?
No, he wasn't doing that.
Okay.
I was still working. I was still working there.
Yeah, but not this extra stuff and this,
there was no extra. So once I got to the point where I wanted to buy something that didn't make sense. It would have been like, this doesn't make sense, from my wife, from my family, friends, coworkers. It was a motorcycle, it was a $35,000 motorcycle. I was like, how am I going to do this? How can I explain this money? And so that's when I kicked off the gambling thing. And I had never really been a gambler before, but I knew from doing taxes that if you win a jackpot over $1,200, you get a W-2G. You get a tax form that says you won X amount of dollars. So I don't care if I win money or lose money. If I have a tax form that says I won that amount of money, I can spend that amount of money, is the way I looked at it. So
right.
I tested my hypothesis. Like I took like probably $40,000 to a casino. I played high dollar video poker until I won $30,000. I went home and told my wife, hey, I just happened to win $30,000 today. I'm going to buy this motorcycle. And I told everybody that. Everybody, like the first time, everybody's like, oh, that's a great story. Everybody's really happy for you that you won $30,000,
Right.
But then when I need $55,000 for a car I want to buy, and then I need, every time I do it, like the third time you go to the casino and come home with $70,000, and people are like, I've been to a casino before. I'm pretty sure they don't just like hand out money like this. And so it was early on in that people were starting to really question.
Okay.
I had it down. I never let people gamble with me. I never let people see stuff. Yeah. I would just show up with fistfuls of W-2s but tons of money. So that was
because those because it's the W-2G that's the gambling one, right?
Right.
And that and they care about is how much you won, not how much you blew to get. So if you won,
it's not a net win or loss. It's a gross win.
Okay. Yeah, and I didn't know that about those. So that's very interesting. And again, very obviously this was very well thought through process to cover your tracks and even like from a money laundering kind of position, you were you brought it out dirty, but you took it out of your bank account pretty clean,
right,
and justifiable. So just in terms, like going back to what you were talking about, like right at the beginning, because you said like when you're in high school, you were popular, you were a good athlete, like everything was kind of going your way, but you were still just not a happy dude. Were you, when you were rolling in it with this stuff, with the money, buying the stuff, you had this, you didn't have to worry about, you didn't buy hamburger on sale, you bought steak and damn the coupons, that kind of thing. Were you happy during that time? Did it my assumption is still no, but also I got to think maybe, yeah, you were. I mean, an honest reflection on that. Was that a happy time for you?
It was absolutely miserable.
Really?
It was miserable from the standpoint that I just looked at myself as more of a fraud. It's really easy to be a big shot and spend somebody else's money. I wasn't earning the money. It felt cool at times to be able to do things that other people probably would never do, or take my friends on a trip or do something. There was some level of satisfaction in that. But the bottom line was the misery of knowing that I was just a loser stealing the money. The bottom line of always knowing I was going to get caught and what it was going to do to me and tear apart my family and the things I was going to do to everybody around me was miserable. And you could see it in me over that time period, how much I changed, how dark I got, how withdrawn I was, how horrible I was to other people because I hated myself. I was a miserable person from every standpoint. I treated people like garbage. I was a huge jerk to everybody because I was just so disgusted by myself, and I just lashed out on others because of that. So it was a horrible, miserable time, and it just got worse and worse and worse, every day. So
I just want to ask you about something you said. So even during that time, you knew where this was going to end up. You knew this ended with the fraud collapsing and whatever the consequences of that would be. It's somewhere in your mind, you knew that.
Right. There was times where, like I said, I had rules early on where I would only steal as much as I could, keep the books even, which, we'll hit on that, the foreign exchange and how I got that stuff past auditors and how I made it, go away. If I would have quit after $1 million, I probably would have got away with it, kind of thing. There was times I was like, should I quit? Should I be done with this? The whole thing was, even though it was miserable, it was so addicting. The money, the fraud was just an absolute rush every time to do it. There were so many pieces, but I was never in true denial about what the end game was. And that got more and more clear to me as time went on. When I got to the point where I didn't want to do it anymore. My life was horrible, and I could not function anymore. There was no way out of it. There's no way out of this without me going to prison, and that was when I got to the point where I stopped stealing. It was like, I'm just going to stop and wait. Somebody's going to figure it out at some point. I never had the courage at any point to even think about turning myself in, but I knew that the writing was on the wall from early on, and that got more and more apparent to me throughout the whole time.
And I could see that almost becoming a vicious circle too, where if you're going, if I stopped right now, eventually somebody's gonna figure this out and I'm gonna get caught. So why not keep doing it? Why not ride this till it has to end instead of ending it myself if I'm gonna get caught one way or the other? Was that part of your mindset at all?
There was definitely a cycle in that everything I did made me feel horrible, and so I did something worse to cover that horribleness up, which made me feel more horrible. So, I'm going to steal this today, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to do this, treat somebody like trash, I'm going to do something horrible to cover up the last one, and it just got this downward spiral of just horribleness. And it got to the point where there was no way out for me, there was just, I just felt like there was no way out, and I just had to step back and wait for it to happen.
Jeez. Hey, Caleb, didn't you have some sort of question about a foreign currency exchange or something like that you wanted to ask?
Well, it kind of doesn't seem that important now, but
well, lay it on us. Because I think this is, again, one of the unexpected twists. Because our audience, we have a lot of people who just listen casually. We've got a lot of people who listen to our podcast who are professional CPAs. I thought it was very interesting and very creative the way that you buried your fraud in the books at ING, which was through foreign currency, which part of why that seems so novel is that I think for the vast majority of people, you can go your whole career without having to audit, or if you're in public, you never audit a company that does foreign currency exchanges, or if you're in a company, if you work in industry, you don't. Your company just does domestic business. So, but that's where you found a convenient place to keep this out of sight from, like you said, from the auditors. Can you tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of that?
Yeah. So with phase two, with phase one, all I did was when I would request a check, I would credit cash debit write off, like literally.
Oh, okay.
I had huge. We could write off large amounts. So to write off $83,000 over a summer was nothing. But once my amount started raising up, I ran into the thing where I need to put it somewhere, and then I need to figure out how to get rid of it. And so as there's this growing, what I call my growing fraudulent balance in this ledger account that I reconcile on a monthly basis, I need to get this reconciliation with millions of dollars of fraud in the balance past my boss on a monthly basis, past auditors probably twice a year, internal and external, Sarbanes-Oxley control testing people going on at that time, state insurance examiners. There's a lot of people digging into this stuff. And so the first thing I identified, and again, this is because I spent 6 years reconciling the account where I was going to stick this. I knew how my boss is going to look at it. I knew how auditors were going to look at it. I knew how to manipulate a 22-year-old fresh auditor into, confusion and letting me convince them what they should put in their work papers.
Wait, how do you do that? You can't just drop that and not tell us how you did it.
This is a common.
What was it?
This is a common theme in a lot of these stories. Is like, young auditors that you kind of just take down a very strange and impossible path.
Quickly, the account that I was going to put this in was we had a Canadian subsidiary, and so single standing office in Canada where everything happened in Canada because of regulatory purposes. We had an office, we had workers there, the investments backing the reserves were up there. They collected all the premium up there. They paid all the claims and commissions up there. Everything happened there, and that had to filter down into PeopleSoft in the United States. And so we called this the Canadian package. So basically on a monthly basis, they had to get me their 3 pieces of information. They had their contract-related stuff. They had access to our admin system, so they processed all of their stuff on our admin system. That flowed straight to PeopleSoft. They had their, the general expense items, their expense stuff from their office. What I did was I took, their trial balance on a monthly basis, figured out their expenses, and I made an entry to PeopleSoft on a monthly basis for their expenses. The third piece was the investment income. So let's say we had $200 million up there in investments backing the reserves. All that money was in T-bills and bonds in 10 million Canadian dollar increments. So on a monthly basis, we're receiving interest payments and buying and selling T-bills and bonds. So all of that came through me. So I would verify the contract-related stuff in admin. I made the entries for the general expense items. The investment activity all came to me. I would put together an exhibit with the Canadian dollar entries for everything. I would translate it to US dollars, forward this exhibit to investment accounting in Atlanta. They would make the entry. So those are the 3 pieces. In addition to that, I had to reconcile their bank account. So on PeopleSoft, we had one ledger account, Canadian bank, but that was actually made up of 5 actual bank accounts in Canada, 3 in Canadian dollars and 2 in US dollars. So I was reconciling 5 accounts in 2 currencies into one ledger account in US dollars. So it was a mess. There's always foreign exchange difference. There's just a ton of different types of activity there going on, and I had to reconcile it. So it's a mess. I was the only person who had worked on this the whole 6 years at that point I had been there. Nobody really knew all the pieces, how it all fit together, including my boss. So I was like, perfect spot to put this.
Sure.
I'm going to, when I steal money, credit, cash, debit this account. And so I've got this growing debit balance in this ledger account that, number one, I need to get past my boss and auditors. So that part of it was, again, from doing this for years, I knew that when on off quarter end months, my boss was gonna verify my reconciliation, and he was gonna verify the ledger balance off a query that I gave him because he didn't know how to query stuff. So
okay, there you go.
I would query the balance of the account. Let's say it's $8 million, but $3 million of that $8 million is my fraud. I would query it. I could download it into Excel, and I would just subtract off 3 million and print it out, and he would tie to an incorrect balance. Just super basic. Just, you know. But on quarter end months and like year end, auditors and my boss, they would tie my reconciliation back to an actual trial balance or balance sheet. So I couldn't fake the balance. So I had to find a fake reconciling item. So same concept. When investment accounting made their entry every quarter for ING investment activity, they made one entry to PeopleSoft for all the investment activity across ING Americas. So there's one entry that was thousands of lines long, representing billions of dollars in activity. I would query that entry. I need to find a $3 million entry that I need to make it look like they hit our books on accident. I query it. I find a $3 million entry. I bring this query into Excel. The $3 million entry that I need is a fake outstanding item. I change the business unit in the account and make it look like they hit our account in error. And I put it on my reconciliation. Investment accounting hit our account in error. We'll correct next month. And so the reason it worked was because that's how we moved money around within ING and PeopleSoft. Was instead of, you get my money, instead of you wiring me the money, you would just do a cash transfer entry over PeopleSoft, your business unit to my business unit. PeopleSoft handles the do from in the middle. You stick it somewhere, and people made those entries all the time, and they made them incorrectly. So our reconciliations every month had cash transfer entries that were done incorrectly, super common. So I just made it look like investment accounting, they tagged our account, should have been Security Life of Denver. My thought at the time is internal audit or external auditors, are they going to say, well, our team in Denver can verify that they have an outstanding item for $3 million because they should have got that entry and you got it. They never did that. So I just tweaked an entry. And again, I was always like, how does nobody find this? Because when I check my people's reconciliations, the first thing I do is run the queries. Yeah. Because somebody independently verified my queries, and they allowed me to use queries downloaded into Excel that I could just manipulate. So super basic stuff.
Right. Well, and if I was in Denver, I would have been like, the hell is this $3 million charge? Because you think somebody's reconciling that side too. And maybe eventually, I guess people just throw up their hands and go, who knows what the hell this is? We, like you said, it's billions and billions of dollars. This is dust on the scales. Forget about it, write it off and move on.
All right. So that was the first part of it. How do I get it past them? I just could fake stuff. And, I could make a query, say whatever I wanted because they would accept it in Excel. And nobody ever asked me to run a query in front of them. Nobody could run the query themselves. So it was just like no independent verification of my queries. The second part was, well, how do I make that go away? I can't write it off now. I can't expense it. How am I going to get rid of $8.5 million? And so that's where I thought, just in general, I was like, I don't want to make an entry just for my fraud. The only explanation for this entry is to get rid of fraud. I wanted to manipulate something that I was already doing to chisel away at that balance. And so back to the Canadian package, the investment activity. So on a monthly basis, there might be $50 million of activity because they might buy and sell, 5 different 10 million Canadian dollar T-bills or bonds. So the amount of activity investment-wise could be significant even if the net was small. So I was like, okay, here's what I need to do. I list out my activity. So buy 10 million Canadian dollar T-bill, sell, buy, sell, whatever it is. So now I have all my Canadian dollar amounts for my investment activity for the month. I was supposed to use the average monthly exchange rate of Canadian dollars to US dollars to translate that activity to US dollars to put in. So now that I have that in there, it's 0.92. Okay, well, what if I manipulate it now? I know my entries are supposed to translate at 0.92. Well, what if all the debits I translate to 0.91 and all the credits I translate to 0.93? And so I credit my account for more than it should be credited for, and I debit it for less than it should be debited for. Mm-hmm. Over time, it's going to eat away at that. Every entry that's a credit's too high, every debit's too low. Over time, that would eat away at that balance, silently eat away at that balance. And so the first time I did it, like you look at it, I know that these are all 10 million Canadian dollars. So this column should all be 9.2 million US dollars. But this one's all $9.3 million credits and $9.1 million debits. So when I look at the exhibit, I'm like, this does not look right. So I'm taking a chance at sending this to someone to actually enter. The girl who did that stuff, I had known her for years. I assumed if she spotted it and asked me, I could just say, oh, I screwed up, forgot to update the rates. With everything I did, I always thought the first time I could probably get away with it being a screw up. Later, I'm screwed. But so, the first time I did it, I sent it to her. She made the entries. The next thing was, I showed the exhibit with the .92 translation to my boss. Then I had to show him next month that those entries all went at, .92 translation, 9.2 million. They didn't. All the credits were 9.3 and all the debits were 9.1. So I would query it, download it to Excel, and type in what I wanted it to say. Again, with no verification. So over a 4-year period, every single month, every debit that hit that account for investment activity was less than it should be, and every credit was more than it should be. And so I ate away about $5.5 million that balance over that 4-year period. So there was about $3 million of that balance left in there when I got busted. So
Gotcha. So actually, first off, fun fact, there is an actor that I follow on Pornhub called the Canadian Package. So that's just a weird coincidence. But
Noted.
also just curious. I mean, the next point in the story is, how did you get caught? Because because it was not internal audit, it was not external audit, it wasn't the insurance auditors, it wasn't any of those people. Tell the folks what happened.
So obviously, I had thoughts all along, who's going to catch me, And initially, I thought, with all the audits, internal, external, all the people digging through our stuff, and every single person that audited our books went through the Canadian package, which quickly, what I did to the young auditors was I would lay all this paperwork out. You guys are old enough to remember, the green line dot matrix paper. I had the big green line dot matrix paper. I had all these different exhibits, and I would lay everything out. And when I did my reconciliation, I had every different colored highlighter meant something different. So I would take this 22-year-old kid and I would start doing this goes to this and this, and I would just talk them in circles until they just were assy-eyed and had no idea what I was talking about. And from going through this, I knew that they had the same work papers every year. They had the same stuff every year. And they're like, so what should we put in our work papers? And I would tell them what to put. They would put it in and they would move on to the next thing. So It was just preying on the confidence of a young auditor that's not going to say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
Right.
I need to go and ask my senior. I need always just preying on that they don't want to look stupid, so they're not going to bring it up and they're just going to tell it right and move on. So,
right. Or alternately, they've got all this pressure to be like, we've got, so many billable hours budgeted in this project. You better sure make sure you're not over this. And if you're talking about all this complicated stuff, they go, okay, I'm just going to take his word on this because I don't want to get the beat down from my manager about going over hours too. So brilliant. So, okay. So that's how you manipulated the auditors.
So back to how I got caught. So first it was auditors. They never caught anything. The next thing I thought, the IRS might come digging because of my extreme income growth over a 4-year period. Since that money was all going on my taxes. In addition, so on my actual taxes, I had my normal W-2 income. I had a Schedule C with millions of dollars. And then I also had my gambling income, which was washed by gambling losses. And so there's a lot of stuff happening on my taxes. So I thought, going from 150 grand to $1 million to $2 million to $4 million might raise red flags enough to get audited. So they did not come knocking until after I got busted. So then I was internally, who's going to catch me? I already mentioned I didn't think my boss would find it, just based on knowing his limitations within our systems and stuff. So I was like, the person I think is going to catch me is my coworker whose password I'm using. For many reasons. She's the smartest person there. She knows everything I know and some. She's the one who trained me in. She has all the access that I have, and I'm using her user ID to commit the fraud. And so I thought, if anybody's going to catch me, it's going to be her. But she didn't really have any reason to look at anything until in August of 2007. So I'd stopped stealing in June or July, and I was just in this waiting period, somebody's going to find it. So we get an email from accounts payable one day in August, and the email is to my boss, my coworker, and me. And the email says, if you guys want to keep your signing authority of $250,000 on checks, you need to have this paperwork filled out, approved, and sent back to us. And so instantly my thought was, this is it. Now my boss and coworker know that we have this signing authority that I've been abusing. This is going to be the thing that gets me caught. And even though I wanted it to be over, I was scared to death about what being caught meant. So at that point, as soon as I read that email, I heard my boss walk out in the hallway and my coworker walk out there. So when I walk out there and our boss says, did you guys know you had signing authority on checks? And I said, no, I didn't know that. He's like, would you guys need that? And I said, no. And so he went right back into his office, emailed accounts payable and said, revoke that authority. They shouldn't have it. But I knew that that wasn't the end of it. And so basically what happened with my coworker is she ran a query to see if her user ID was associated with any check payments. And what she found was that in 2007, she had approved $1 million in checks. And so I'm sure that was shocking to her that she had approved $1 million in checks that year. A couple weeks later, my boss comes into my office on 2:00 on a Friday afternoon, and he hands me this query, and he's like, can you show me the backup for these checks? And I look at the query, and it pops out to me that that's $1 million in checks I had stolen that year, and he wants the backup. And so that day, it turned out that
well, hold on. Was that just a bullshit question? Was that really him just saying, I caught you stealing? Or was what's that?
At the time, I thought, this is how he's confronting me. He's just like messing with me right now. I assumed he knew and that this was his way of confronting me and making me sweat.
Okay.
The
reality
reality
he really
was,
just wanted vouchers and invoices?
Yeah, he didn't know at that point. And I've talked to people there since that they didn't suspect me until like later. So it turned out that the girl that entered that stuff that would have had that backup had it actually existed, she happened to be out that day. And so I just talked my way out of the office like, sorry, I don't know where she keeps it. We can't find it. But he was really pushing me that day. It wasn't like just a casual, oh, she's gone. Okay. It was, we're digging through her desk. We're looking here. We're looking there. And, I knew right where that stuff was. And for the legit stuff, I knew where that was, but I wasn't going to show it to him because obviously there was no backup for these checks. So at that point I knew like it's over. I went home that Friday night and I was like, it's over. Like I researched lawyers. I got a lawyer on the phone that night. I went into work the next morning. I created fake check requests for all of those, that $1 million in checks. Everything looked legit. I copied signatures. I set up my fake company with the same name as this insurance broker we used in Bermuda. And the reason I did that is because they would send in money sometimes and they couldn't identify what it was for. So if we couldn't identify it, it goes into suspense. It causes a reconciling item. It's a pain in the butt. So sometimes we just send the money back. So I made it look like I was refunding money that we couldn't identify. And so I was just sending it to this broker, but I was sending it to myself. So I faked all these things. I was like shredding documentation. I was trying to just cover my tracks any way I could. I went and met with my lawyer that day. He's like, you need to go in on Monday morning and to mount a defense, we need to know what they know. So I went in Monday morning when my boss got in. I went in there. I had a whole notebook full of fake documentation. I explained these payments were all refunds for premium we couldn't identify, so that we sent it all back. And he was like, oh, that makes sense, okay. And I was like, did I just get away with this?
Right.
And so at that point, he's like, I just need to go show this to Mike. Mike was our CFO. Mike was my boss's boss, and Mike was the person whose signature I faked in all my fake documentation. So when he's like, I got to go show this to Mike, he walked upstairs with this notebook full of fake documentation. I ran to my office, grabbed my stuff, ran out to my car, and squealed out of the parking lot. And so that's what I was saying. My coworker was saying,
like, I'll just wait here while you go talk with Mike. And you're heading home. Yeah.
That was like when you squealed out of the parking lot, that's when they thought maybe you were the one to look at. So I tipped him off, but it wasn't, once you knew what to look for, it was really easy to find. I had a query made to just pull my fraudulent stolen checks. So all this unfolds. You end up, the FBI get involved, I'm sure. You go to court. You get, you were sentenced to,
was it 97 months in jail?
Yep.
And how much? But you only spent like about 2/3 of that because you got out early for good behavior.
So in the federal system, you do 85% of your time. You're given your good time on the first day. So out of 97 months, I had 380 days of good time on that. So you can't earn more good time, but you can lose your good time.
Okay.
So I ended up doing 5.5 years in prison. And so there's the 380 days of good time. Then there's something called RDAP, Residential Drug Abuse Program, in the federal system, where if you don't have to prove you're an addict, you just have to prove you drank or did drugs, before you got busted. So I qualified for that. So if you take that 40-week drug program, you qualify for up to a year off. You qualify for exactly. Qualify for up to a year off. So I got a year off for that program. And then you do your last 6 months on home confinement. So out of my 8 years, I got a year off for good time, a year off for the drug program, and then the last 6 months you on home confinement. So you're still a federal inmate. You can work, you can, start to rebuild with your family. You're just monitored on a daily basis at home, at work, wherever you are. So
Right.
5.5 years in prison was plenty. When I went to prison, my kids were 5 and 1, and when I came home, they were 11 and 7. So
in 5.5 years, that's just barely enough time to write one article for the Journal of Accountancy. I know I've done that as well. So
Man, it took me until my last month there to get that done too.
Yeah.
I'm Nathan. I'm curious about what was your prison experience like? I mean, how did you spend your days other than writing the J of A article? I mean, I know prison obviously changes people. How did it change you?
Right. So it's a prison camp. It's minimum security. So it was not white collar prison the way I thought it'd be. I was in Duluth, Minnesota. It's an old Air Force base. So it's like a 100-acre compound. When I was there, it was between 900 and 1,000 people. 85% are low-level drug crimes. So it's all like drug dealers and gangbangers from, Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit. It's not a bunch of accountants. So, but it's basically a small community, and it's managed by prison staff, but the inmates are the people doing all the work. So you got to find a job. You have a 40-hour-a-week job there like anything else. And so I got a job in education as an education clerk. So we had an office, I had a desk. I went to work every day. Our office was open from 7:30 in the morning until 9 at night. So if you weren't at chow or at count time back for 4 o'clock, we could be at work or working out. So my daily was get up, eat breakfast, go to work, eat lunch, work out. I lost 75 pounds my first 5 months in prison, and I stayed in tip-top shape the whole time there. So I probably worked out an hour to 2 hours a day every single day.
Nice.
You just get in a rhythm of here's what I do every single day, and you don't think about what day it is or what year it is. You get a routine and you follow that routine. And so weekends it slows down because you don't have your work to go to. I had a lot of visits. I had a lot of support from the outside world. So the whole time, for me, I got there the first day. Somebody basically said, you're either going to die or it's time to fix yourself. You have all these years of prison. This is your opportunity to become the person you want to be, work on yourself, And so I had somebody that held me accountable to get in shape, physically, mentally. I just started reading about happiness and reading about positive attitude and all these things and positive psychology. And I just kind of evolved there. I was part of a speaking program where we went out and spoke to college kids and business people and all these different areas. And so I taught classes in prison. I did a lot of stuff I had never done before. I gained new skills in public speaking and teaching and writing. And so by the time I got out, I was a different person. Everybody recognized that I was in no way the person that had gone in there who was, I'd just given up. I thought my life was over in every way. I learned that my life was just beginning, and a lot of people encouraged me and gave me opportunities along the way to be where I am and who I am now. So I'm very grateful for what it all did for me,
Yeah. So Nathan, how much? I assume I don't remember reading this, but were you court ordered to pay restitution for your crime?
Yeah. So my crime was easy in that when ING investigated, they came to us and said, we think you stole $8,455,178.55.
Okay.
And I agreed. I kept I have a log of every check. I know exactly what I stole at the time. As I was committing the fraud, I didn't want to know, so I never looked at the sum column. I kept it off the screen, but we agreed on the loss amount from the start, which makes things easy. That's the exact number that my criminal restitution was. So you pay restitution while you're incarcerated, while you're on probation, and then probation lasts 20 years from the time you are out of prison. So I think I have like 13-ish more years. And so how it works is I get a bill in the mail every month, just like any other bill. They monitor, they track my payments every month. And so how they determine the amount is they just come in and audit my finances whenever they want to. And so, it's a full financial disclosure. They get all of my financial information, income, assets, expenses, liabilities, everything. And then I think there's an IRS chart of acceptable expenses based on income levels, and then they set my payment amount based on that. So
now when they do that audit, do they rely on your queries that you pull, or do they do those queries themselves?
they actually they ask for third-party verification for some reason.
Good. All right. That seems confident. Nice.
Obviously, I wish I had $8 million to pay it back. I mean, I still owe $7.5 million. But the way the process works, they're not trying to crush anybody. They're not trying to put me, out of commission. They want me to make an honest effort to pay what's reasonable for me in my situation. Child support comes first. Like, they make sure that I'm handling all my responsibilities. And so there's a lot of accountability there.
Yeah.
And it's a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha. So just to clarify that, when you said, so restitution happens during your probation period. Probation is 20 years after you get out of the slammer. Then is it basically whatever you can reasonably pay of that $8.5-ish million in 20 years? That's your restitution? Or,
yeah.
So that doesn't hang over your head for the rest of your life. And you're not.
So I've already been given my completion date of restitution when it's done. So basically at that point, the judge writes it off after 20 years.
Okay.
So
gotcha. Have you thought about taking money and going to Las Vegas and gambling to try to pay your 8.5? Do you play Powerball constantly?
I mean, I do play the Powerball. I became addicted to gambling when I was committing my fraud. And my whole fraud turned from using gambling to like explain my money to, I was just stealing to gamble. And so, it's the one holdover from my fraud where I don't gamble, I don't go to casinos, I don't mess with that stuff. But, the reality is I have great data on my gambling, and I know that out of the $8.5 million I lost $6.2 million of it gambling. So,
jeez, holy shit. That's insane.
But I also my W2G winnings over those years, I had like 178,000 of winnings in 2004, 380 in 2005, 870 in 2006, and like 1.3 million in 2007. So I was gambling a ton, but I was losing.
Yeah. And again, it seems like it's justifiable. It's like, I can't not gamble because this is how I justify. Right. This is how I cover my tracks.
Right.
So, right. So interesting. So nowadays, is your job speaking on fraud? What is your day job now? Are you a full-time speaker, presenter, talking about fraud and ethics?
I'm an accountant again.
You're okay.
Not your standard situation of a guy I was in prison with, started a very successful business at a time when they were growing exponentially. They couldn't afford the accountant they needed, but they could afford me. So, we both took advantage of the situation in that they know how much experience and ability I have, and they know I could get a job somewhere else. So they gave me a chance, to get back in the game. And so it's been an amazing opportunity for me to grow, to continue to do something I love, to be a part of something, super exciting. Obviously, we're very deliberate how we do things and setting up controls and very transparent in our communication. There's no like beating around the bush, like I can't do this or I can't see this. We don't need to whisper about it in the corner. We can all just say, because of your past, you can't do this, And so
Yeah.
I've done a lot of different stuff here. I've been here for 2 years now. I'm also in a tax role now, like a corporate tax role. So,
okay.
But I've got to do a ton of stuff here. I got to use a lot of my experience. I have experience public and private. I've experienced big and small. And so I've kind of seen everything, and I've been able to use that here. And just one more thing I feel extremely lucky about is being given this chance. So I still do some speaking. I don't actively market myself anymore, look for speaking. If it pops up, I do it. My employer is very supportive of my speaking opportunities and the ability to keep doing stuff. So I don't know, it's kind of best of both worlds. I get to keep doing this work. I get to keep speaking. I get to be myself and be, open and honest about every part of my life.
Cool. So one last question. Looking back on the fraud that you committed, because obviously you've had tons of time to ponder it, have you been able to identify something that ING, Jesus, I did it again. Have you been able to identify something that ING could have done that would have just prevented your fraud? Because again, you even said it. You're kind of like, you found yourself in this position. It was your daily position. You knew the ins and outs of it, and you can kind of go, oh, there's a loophole there that isn't unplugged. There's a loophole there that's unplugged. Was there some? And that's just inescapable. That's right. Why we have to take ethics training as CPAs. But have you identified something that's like, if AIG did this, it would have been a silver bullet, and I would not have been able to do my job? Not been able to commit the fraud.
I think that there's some real basic stuff. A big part of the problem was that all the controls in place that would have stopped this, I was responsible for. And so
right.
I could manipulate them. And to me, it comes down to this, and it's not necessarily ING, but from an audit perspective, the two things were, I worked with queries that I could download into Excel and type in, and nobody ever verified them. So it was as simple as an auditor saying, run this in front of me, or somebody else running the query to verify it. The other thing was that when we were audited, auditors came in and they gave me a list of what they wanted in a couple weeks. And they would accept copies of source documents versus actual source documents for verification. I could fake anything. I was part of the rolling out PeopleSoft program, so I was a power user in PeopleSoft, so I could go into reports and rewrite them, manipulate them, exclude things that I didn't want in reports. So you think you're looking at a list of all checks that were printed, but I'm giving you a list of all checks that were printed except manual checks, which is my fraud. I could do that. You give me a printer, I can run multiple reports in different areas and make it look like I ran it 6 months ago with a timestamp from then, because I could just, anything they wanted, I could fake. And so it was all super basic, all super simple, just like independent third-party verification of anything I ever gave them. And there was everything was accepted at face value.
Right. So there was it was the professional skepticism that was missing, where it's like, we trust this guy, but professional skepticism is like, we still shouldn't trust him. Let's make sure that we at least go, but again, there's an endless, that's what makes prevention of fraud so difficult, because there's an endless list of things that you should and could do to make sure to plug all those holes that are out there. But actually doing all those, you end up getting this cost benefit problem where it's like, we could do that, but it'd take a whole team of people to do that. And people like you who are trying to do their job wouldn't even be able to do their job, because you're spending all your time trying to comply with all of the internal controls and the internal audit demands on you. So it's such an intractable problem, fraud, obviously, which but hopefully between your efforts of what you're doing, and we're hoping our podcast in its little way too helps to plug as many holes as we possibly can.
Agreed.
Awesome. And I think that's a great place to end. Well, hey, one more time, man. Thank you so much for carving some time out of your day to talk to us. We appreciate it a ton. So yeah, muchas gracias, Nathan.
Yeah, I appreciate it too.
Okay, that was Nathan Mueller, and I thought that was great. Greg, did we learn anything?
Absolutely. There was so much to me that I was able to glean about this case. So much of the kind of the more of the tacit sort of stuff, not the explicit. Here's the steps of the fraud, but it was so interesting to be able to listen to Nathan talk about more of the texture of the fraud and things like that. And one of the things that really stuck out to me, and I think it stuck out to you too, is that Nathan, he's like a good accountant. He's like really good at what he does. And the fact that he is so good at what he does is the reason that he was able to, like if anybody who was dumber than him, worse than him at that job, couldn't have pulled it off.
Right.
I mean, just with everything he was talking about, with how to manipulate the internal controls, even to how to bury it in the financial statements, and how to play as boss and play the auditors and stuff like that. The guy, the rules that he had for how to spend the money and all of the stuff with the gambling 1099. I mean, the guy, he was smart and he thought this shit out. Yeah. But do you remember at the beginning where it was like, so were you are you a great people person? He was basically like, no, I was not a great people person.
Yeah.
I was kind of a grump, and I pretty much wanted everybody to leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
So, but he had like I said, his career capital was built because he was so good at what he did, and that not only gave him the trust, but it also gave him just the sheer ability to be able to pull off this fraud. So, connecting some dots from my life. A long time ago on a podcast, I listened to the district attorney of Northern California, who said his advice was, if you want to prevent fraud at your company, make sure that everybody in the accounting department just fucking hates each other. Like, no team building. You want these people to just despise you. So not only do they not work together well, they're like hoping somebody does something bad so they can stab them in the back with a knife and like deliver them to their boss to go, see, this motherfucker needs to go. But so that, and which is not false if your only goal is to make sure that fraud doesn't happen. But then, with what we heard from Nathan, I'd like to add to that not only do you want to hire an accounting department where they all hate each other, but also where they're all like super shitty at their job. Because if they hate each other and they're shitty at their job, they can't. Even if they're shitty at their job, they're too dumb to figure out how to manipulate the accounting system to perpetrate fraud. I mean, that'll be part of it, because they're not good at their job. And then the other part is, even if they do try anyways, their coworkers are going to be ready to fillet them at any moment. So there you go. That's the internal control that they don't tell you about in school.
I think the other thing is that hopefully they're all a little bit lazy, because I think what we've discussed at great length in many of these episodes is that the perps end up working way harder at the fraud than they would at a regular day job. And so if you're lazy, you're not going to be like, oh, I can't keep that up. There's no way. So there's a few different kind of unorthodox internal controls that you can implement there. Lazy employees, average employees, and employees that actively dislike each other.
Yeah, so during the interview process, if you say, describe yourself in 3 words, and the 3 words aren't dumb, mean, and lazy, you say, get the fuck out of here. You're not the person we're looking for.
I'm a disagreeable person. You're hired. Right. I guess my biggest takeaway from this was just you can tell that guy spent a lot of years doing soul searching, because
Yeah.
I think he has a pretty good grasp on where he was in his life and why he did what he did, even if he doesn't maybe either talk about or know what the rationalization was. Because he was talking about, like, when you asked him, it's like, how were you feeling during this time? And he's like, I was miserable. Like,
Right.
he wasn't lying. Like, he was
Yeah.
definitely telling us the
Right.
truth, that like that period of his life.
I was thinking it would be more nuanced. Yeah, I thought it'd be like it was fucking rad, but also, but no, he was just straight to no. It was horrible.
Straight ahead, and it was specifically because he knew that it was all predicated on a lie.
Yeah.
And that underneath everything else, that he knew that was wrong. And so that is, I don't know. I've read plenty of accounts of fraud, and you read plenty of accounts of people who are that say they're remorseful or they regret their decisions or this and that and whatever. And I don't, I give people the benefit of the doubt. And this was our first interview with a perp. So I guess for me to like have the conversation with him and kind of hear him and watch his body language and the tone of his voice and everything. And it's just like, no, that dude was in a dark place. And he even said, like, getting near the end, like, just how he treated people. He told us that he was in that dark place. And I think I was surprised by his level of forthrightness about how bad it was for him.
Right. Because when he was,
which is interesting.
Yeah. Because he basically said, I was treating everybody as a means to an end. And you were like, oh man, I relate to that. So, but isn't that what? I'll have to re-listen.
No,
no, that wasn't.
No, that I didn't relate to him in that sense. But like the part where he was just like, where he was
so
the
not
part.
Not the sociopathy. That wasn't the.
No. Greg,
how did you connect?
Have you felt that I was a sociopath this whole time? What
just in your eyes. Just in your eyes.
Okay.
Wow. Oh, well, let me think. Oh,
I got something. I'll have to bring this up with my therapist in my next session.
Right. Hold on. One other thing that stuck out to me that was like a true learning moment was hearing him explain what the whole restitution process was. I didn't know that there was you've got $8.5 million to repay, but if you can't pay that back in 20 years, then I guess we'll just write it off as bad debt. That's fucking weird to me. I thought that hung over your head for the rest of your life, but they've got an end date where you're like, after this point, you're scot-free. So that's going to motivate a lot of our listeners to go commit those frauds because the jail sentence is going to be light, and you're not going to have to pay back all that money you steal. So let's go get it while the getting's good. Am I right?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's it for today's episode, everybody. Remember, if your New Year's resolution is to lose 75 pounds, go to a federal minimum security prison.
And also remember that although AIG is an international finance and insurance corporation, it had nothing to do with today's episode.
So, Caleb, where can people find you out there in the internet if they'd like to get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter at CNewquist and LinkedIn / Caleb Newquist. Greg, where are you on the internet?
I am at Greg Kite on pretty much all the social media handles, and my OnlyFans is titled The Canadian Package.
Lovely. Oh, Canada.
Right. It's fraudulent. I'm not from there. This is a package from the great United States of America.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kite and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave us a review or share with a friend. That's how people find the show. Be sure to subscribe on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And for the accountants out there, if you listen to this podcast on Earmark, you could get free CPE. I don't know about Canada, though. Not available.
No, not Canadians. It doesn't count for Canadian CPE. So
that's a package to come later.
It's a whole different package.
A different package. Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say, "Oh my fraud."
Canadian.